morning or good afternoon or good evening. I am Gianluigi Segalerba and I am going to speak with you about some points contained in Cesare Beccaria, Cesare Beccaria's work, and precisely on Cesare Beccaria's thoughts and refusal of Churcher. In order to present myself, I would like to show you my email address. My email address is gianluigisegarelba@gmail.com. And of course, everything is at disposal. The slides of this meeting are at disposal. You only need to contact me at my Gmail address. And so, in order to give you a last instruction regarding my slides, the pages of the PowerPoint which have design are quotations of Beccaria, whereas the pages of the PowerPoint which are without design are my notes, my observations, my reconstruction of the text, and so on and so forth. That is, quotation are always with design. As regards the text and the author of the text, the author with whom we are going to deal is Cesare Beccaria, who was born in Milan 1738 and died in Milan 1794. The work of Cesare Beccaria with which we are going to deal is De Delitti delle Pene in Italian, in the original. It was published in Livorno, Italy, 1764. The translation is an essay on crimes and punishment. This is the translation which I am going to use for my exposition. I quote and give the reference of the translation here in the PowerPoint so that you can find it thereafter. And the web address of this translation is this one in the PowerPoint. Therefore, you will be able to find the translation which I am using here on the internet. In my exposition, I am going to concentrate my contents on chapter 16 of Torture of Beccaria's An Essay on Crimes and Punishments. You will find the whole chapter in the exposition that is in the PowerPoint. The whole chapter 16 is contained in these slides. And in order to introduce you to the questions which I am going to deal with, you can see Beccaria's arguments against Churcher. He exposes throughout the chapter 16 different arguments against the use and the legitimacy of Churcher in the process. And these arguments are the following ones. He says in the chapter 16, Churcher is a form of punishment exercised on people who have not yet been declared guilty. Churcher suspends the protection of the society on the individual. Churcher advantages strong people and disadvantages weak people. And resistance to torture has nothing to do with truthfulness, but only with strength and resistance. As regards the traditional arguments in favor of the use of Churcher, Beccaria quotes and comments on the following ones. He says, Churcher has been regarded as decisive for the confession of the crime. Churcher has been considered as functional to the explanations of a contradiction of a witness. Churcher allegedly serves to the revelation of the accomplices of a crime. Churcher allegedly represents a form of purgatory of the infamy, and Churcher allegedly serves to the discovery of other crimes. We will see the Beccaria's refusal of these, or at least some of these arguments throughout this exposition. Beccaria begins his chapter in the following way. I am going to quote a passage of his chapter, the initial passage of his chapter 16 of Churcher, he says the torture of a criminal during the course of his trial is a cruelty consecrated by custom in most nations. It is used with an intent either to make him confess his crime or explain some contradictions into which he had been led during his examination, or discover his accomplices, or for some kind of metaphysical and incomprehensible purgation of infamy, or finally, in order to discover other crimes of which he is not accused, but of which he may be guilty. So we have seen how Beccaria portrays and describes the ways and the grounds for the use of church. He refuses them all, of course, and as regards the grounds of the refusal of church, he says that no person, for instance, can be judged a criminal until the person is proved guilty. Therefore, torture cannot be used because it is a form of punishment itself on exercise on persons which are under process, which have not yet been regarded as guilty or as innocent, of course. Society may not withdraw the protection of the person until it is proved that the person has violated the condition on which protection depends. Torture represents a form of punishment of a person who has not been proved guilty. Torture represents a form of violation of an innocent, and resistance or non-resistance to pain may not be a measure of truth and of truthfulness. Now, let's see what Beccaria says in his treatise in the chapter 16. He further says, no man can be judged a criminal until he be found guilty, nor can society take from him the public protection until it have been proved that he has violated the conditions on which it was granted. What right then? But that the power can authorize the punishment of a citizen so long as there remains any doubt of his guilt. The dilemma is frequent. Either he is guilty or not guilty. If guilty, he should only suffer the punishment ordained by the laws, and torture becomes useless, as his confession is unnecessary. If he be not guilty, you torture the innocent, for in the eye of the law, every man is innocent whose crime has not been proved. Besides, it is confounding all relations to expect that a man should be both the accuser and accused, and that pine should be the test of truth, as if truth resided in the muscles and fibers of a wretch in torture. By this method, the robust will escape, and the feeble be condemned. These are the inconveniences of this pretended test of truth, worthy only of a cannibal, and which the Romans, in many respects barbarous, and whose savage virtue has been too much admired, reserved for the slaves alone. We can recapitulate the main points of these sentences. You can see the arguments against torture are being guilty is exclusively the effect of a sentence. No suspension of the public protection is allowed if there is no violation of the conditions which determine the public protection. Therefore, torture is not allowed. If the citizens is guilty, torture is useless. The kind of punishment of the guilty individual how to be established by the laws. If the citizens is not guilty, an innocent is tortured. The presumption of innocence should hold. And torture advantages strong person. It is as such no method of proving innocence or guiltiness. Now, in order to take into consideration some points, some further points of this chapter, Beccaria points out that the use of torture for the tribunal is senseless. It has no sense. Torture has no sense as an instrument of solving the contradiction occurred during the examination of an accused person. Dread of punishment, the uncertainty of the fate of the accused, the solemnity of the court, the majesty of the judge, and the ignorance of the accused are already sufficient to confuse the mind of the accused. He says, another intention of torture is to oblige the supposed criminal to reconcile the contradiction into which he may have fallen during his examination, as if the dread of punishment, the uncertainty of his fate, the solemnity of the court, the majesty of the judge, and the ignorance of the accused were not abundantly sufficient to account for contradiction which are so common to men even in a state of tranquillity, and which must necessarily be multiplied by the perturbation of the mind of a man entirely engaged in the thought of saving himself from imminent danger. As regards the origins of the use of Churchill, Beccaria refers the origin of Churchill, of the very use of Churchill, to the origin of the judgment of gods. He says, in within the chapter, he says, this infamous test of truth is a remaining monument of that ancient and savage legislation in which trials by fire, by boiling water, or the uncertainty of combats were called judgments of God, as if the links of that eternal chain, whose beginning is in the breast of the first cause of all things, could never be disunited by the institution of men. The only difference between torture and trials by fire and boiling water is that the event of the first depends on the will of the accused, and of the second on a fact entirely physical and external. But this difference is apparently only not real. A man on the rack in the conversion of Churchill has it as little in his power to declare the truth as in former times to prevent, without fraud, the effect of fire or of boiling water. Excuse me. The consequences of church are in this sense important, because in order to be free from pain, the person will subdue to church or will be ready to admit everything. And in this way, the difference between innocent and guilty will be annulled. That is, church has no sense in the process, has no sense at all in the process. So, in order to go forward with the exposition, you can see Beccaria says every act of the will is invariably in proportion to the force of the impression on our senses. The impression of pain, then, may increase to such a degree that, occupying the mind entirely, it will compel the sufferer to use the shortest method of freeing himself from torment. His answer, therefore, will be an effect as necessary as that of fire or boiling water, and he will accuse himself of crimes of which he is innocent, so that the very means employed to distinguish the innocent from the guilty will most effectually destroy all difference between them. Church has no efficacy for the discovery of truth. This is the sense of Beccaria's sentences. The pain which a person who is tortured has to bear can compel the tortured person to find the easiest way to be freed from pain. Therefore, the tortured individual will admit everything in order to be freed from torture. As a consequence, the tortured individual will accuse himself of everything, and the difference between those who are really guilty and those who are not guilty at all will therewith disappear. There is no relation between the use of torture and the discovery of truth. Innocent persons confess to be guilty even though they are not, in order to be freed from pain. So, and now in order to analyze some points, some further points of Beccaria, you can see that he says the use of church on the process, it would be superfluous to confirm these reflections by examples of innocent persons who from the agony of church have confessed themselves guilty. Innumerable instances may be found in all nations, and in every age. How amazing that mankind have always neglected to draw the natural conclusion. Lives there a man who, if he have carried his thoughts even so little beyond the necessity of life, when he reflects on such cruelty, is not tempted to fly from society and return to his natural state of independence. And the sense is, the main point is this one. Church is senseless for the discovery of truth. There are infinitely many cases of persons who have accused themselves of crimes since they could not bear the church. That is, guiltiness or innocence has nothing to do actually with church. Church can prove only one thing, that is, the degree of resistance to the Churchill himself, but truthfulness, truth, and falsity have nothing to do with Churchill. And he says also, Beccaria says also another sentence, another example of sentences. The result of Churchill then is a matter of calculation and depends on the constitution, which differs in every individual and is in proportion to his strength and sensibility, so that to discover truth by this method is a problem which may be better resolved by a mathematician than a judge, and might be thus stated. The force of the muscles and the sensibility of the nerves of an innocent person being given, it is required to find the degree of pain necessary to make him confess himself guilty of a given crime. It is. Resistance to torture depends on the constitution and strength of the individual. It has no relation with the truth, and if you can calculate how much a person can resist, you can go beyond the degree of resistance and make the person confess everything that you need to be confessed. And therefore, a church is a method only in order to make person confess what you want they confess, and not to ascertain the truth and the falsity of determinate assertions during the examination of the processes themselves. Now, in order to read something more of this interesting chapter, Beccaria says, the examination of the accused is intended to find out the truth, but if this be discovered with so much difficulty in the air, gesture, and countenance of a man at ease, how can it appear in a countenance disturbed by the convulsions of torture? Every violent action destroys those small alterations in the features which sometimes disclose the sentiment of the heart. And in order then to give some passages more of Beccaria, as regards the authentic effects of Churcher actually, on closer inspection, is a method of giving an advantage to the strong persons and to give, on the contrary, a disadvantage to weak persons. Because, Beccaria says, a very strange but necessary consequence of the use of torture is that the case of the innocent is worse than that of the guilty. With regard to the first, either he confesses the crime, which he has not committed, and is condemned, or is acquitted and has suffered a punishment he did not deserve. On the contrary, the person who is really guilty has the most favorable side of the question, for if he supports the torture with firmness and resolution, he is acquitted and has gained, having exchanged a greater punishment for a less. That is, torture is on closer inspection something, a process, a way of behaving with the accused person, which gives advantages to the guilty and only a form of punishment to the person who are innocent. The guilty can escape punishment if he's strong enough to resist torture. So I would like, therefore, to conclude here my exposition, and I thank you very much for your attention. I am at disposal for all questions and all requests of clarification. I would like only to add something, that is, I have not exposed all the contents of the chapter. The chapter is far longer than I have read of it, but I have decided to concentrate my attention on some points and to not to mention other points which are anyway equally interesting. Therefore, I am at disposal for further clarification, and of course, I thank you very much for the exposition and for your invitation, and I'm at your disposal for all questions and clarification. Thank you very much. Thank you.